Bobruisk, Soviet Union, 1952. Somewhere inside a Soviet labor camp, there is a German prisoner no one is looking for. He has no name here. He is prisoner 174. His file is 3 pages long. His sentence, 25 years of hard labor for crimes against the Soviet people. He has been here 7 years already. 7 years of interrogations, of cold, of being told that the truth he carries is a lie. The guards who pass his cell do not wonder about him. To them, he is exactly what the paperwork says he is. Hosenfeld Wilhelm, unrepentant fascist, enemy of the Soviet people. He dies on August 13, 1952. The file is closed. The case is resolved. Another name crossed off a list that no one is reading anymore. But here's what the file doesn't say. That man on the floor, that unrepentant fascist in the German coat, had spent the entire Second World War secretly dismantling the regime he served. He forged documents. He paid Jewish men and women out of the Third Reich's own military budget. He hid resistance fighters inside the German army itself. He saved over 50 Polish citizens and Jews from certain death. And the most famous person he ever rescued? A Jewish pianist named Władysław Szpilman, a man whose memoir would one day become one of the most celebrated films in cinema history. The man who saved the pianist died alone in a Soviet labor camp. Forgotten, defamed, labeled a Nazi war criminal by the very forces that liberated the people he had risked everything to protect. How does that happen? How does a man spend a decade outrunning the Gestapo, only to be destroyed by the people who were supposed to be on the right side of history? That is what we're here to find out. To understand what Wilm Hosenfeld did, you have to understand what he was before the war made him into something else. He was a schoolteacher, a Catholic schoolteacher from rural Hessen, Germany, who believed in God, loved his wife Anne-Marie, and spent his weekends writing letters to his children about the importance of moral courage. He had fought in the First World War, survived it, and come home with the particular exhaustion of a man who has seen what human beings are capable of when given permission to be their worst selves. He was not naive, he was not weak, but he was, and this is the word that appears again and again in his own diaries, troubled. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, Hosenfeld, like millions of Germans, initially joined the Nazi Party. He would later call this the greatest mistake of his life, because unlike most men who made that mistake, Hosenfeld actually looked at what he had become part of. By November 1939, just weeks into the occupation of Poland, he was already writing to Anne-Marie back home in Thallow. Not the letters of a loyal soldier, something else entirely. "I am sometimes ashamed," he wrote, "to be a German soldier." He had witnessed the execution of Polish leaders, the expulsion of Jewish families from their homes. He had seen it with his own eyes, and he could not make himself unsee it, and what he saw destroyed him. He arrived in Warsaw in 1940 as a captain in the Wehrmacht. His official role, military sports officer, responsible for athletic programs and physical training for German troops. It was, on paper, one of the least dangerous jobs in occupied Poland. But Warsaw was not a barracks. Warsaw was a laboratory. The Germans had sealed 400,000 Jewish men, women, and children inside 11 square kilometers of the city, behind walls, behind wire, behind a bureaucratic infrastructure of death so vast and so methodical that even the people inside it sometimes couldn't believe it was real. Hosenfeld saw it. He walked near those walls. He saw what came out, the bodies in the streets, the children with the hollow eyes, the carts that came at dawn to collect whatever had died in the night. And he wrote it all down. January 1942. His diary. Poles and Jews are deprived of their property in order to appropriate it for themselves and enjoy it. They have nothing to eat. They starve and freeze, and they feel no shame about taking everything for themselves and squandering it. July 25th, 1942. The deportations have begun. This week, 30,000 Jews are said to have already left the ghetto, somewhere to the east. He knew what somewhere to the east meant. Everyone with eyes knew. He kept writing. Somewhere, not far from Lublin, there are buildings with electrically heated rooms. The unfortunate people are herded into these heating chambers. and then burned alive. June 1943. The ghetto uprising has been crushed. The SS has set the entire district on fire. Innumerable Jews have been killed, for no reason, senselessly. It is beyond understanding. An SS Sturmfuhrer boasted of the way they shot the Jews down as they ran out of the burning buildings. The entire ghetto has been razed by fire. He was a German officer writing these words, in German, hiding these pages in his uniform, knowing that if anyone read them, he was a dead man, and still, he kept writing. Here is the question historians always fail to answer about good people in bad regimes. When exactly does the line get crossed? Is it the first time you look away? The first time you tell yourself it's not your problem? Or is it the first time you can't sleep? The first time you lie in the dark and realize that looking away is choosing a side? For Hosenfeld, we know the exact moment the line broke, because he wrote it down. August 13th, 1943. It is impossible to believe all these things, even though they are true. He is watching German soldiers celebrate what they have done to the ghetto. His next line is not the language of a soldier. It is the language of a man whose last restraint has snapped. I would like to throw those dogs under the tram. Then, a breath. Then the guilt turns inward. What cowards we are, wanting to be better, and allowing all this to happen. For this, we too will be punished, and our innocent children after us, because in allowing these evil deeds to occur, we are partners to the guilt. September 26th, 1942. He had asked himself the question that no German officer was supposed to ask. But am I not complicit in all this? He answered it himself. We are all too cowardly and comfortable, too false and rotten. That is why we all have to go along with the downfall into doom. And by December 1943, he had reached a conclusion so cold and so clear, it reads like a verdict he handed down on himself. Our entire nation will have to pay for all these wrongs. Many innocent people must be sacrificed before the blood guilt we have incurred can be wiped out. There was no burning bush, no angel in the doorway. There was just a man, alone with his diary, who finally stopped lying to himself, and then he picked up his pen and used it differently. He decided to use the German military machine against itself. Think about what this man actually did, and I mean mechanically, practically, because the audacity of it is almost impossible to comprehend. He didn't hide people in a basement. He didn't smuggle them out in the dead of night. He did something far more dangerous, far more brilliant. He enrolled them in the German army. As a military sports officer, Hosenfeld had access to personnel rosters, payroll systems, and official Wehrmacht documentation, and he used every single piece of that access as a weapon. He put Polish resistance fighters on Hitler's official military payroll, as sports staff, as groundskeepers, as maintenance workers. Men and women who would have been shot on sight in the street were now, on paper, employees of the Third Reich. He forged identity documents. He created paper trails. He built entire fictional lives inside the administrative infrastructure of the Nazi occupation. And every single day, he sat in his office at the Legia Sports Stadium in Warsaw, surrounded by his own soldiers, and ran what amounted to a rogue underground rescue bureau, hidden inside the German military itself. How do you run a resistance cell when your own comrades sleep in the next room? You do it with a straight face and a very steady hand. Every morning, Wilm Hosenfeld walked into that stadium, nodded to the German soldiers at the door, and sat down at his desk. On his desk, official Wehrmacht correspondence, training schedules, personnel files, and buried among them, sometimes, a name that shouldn't be there, a face that didn't match a document, a life hanging from a single piece of paper, one wrong question from a colleague, one suspicious mail clerk, one soldier who looked too closely at the roster. That was all it would have taken. The Gestapo operated in Warsaw with complete authority. They didn't need trials. They didn't need proof. Suspicion was enough to put a man in front of a wall. Hosenfeld knew this. He had watched it happen. And still, every morning he walked in, sat down, picked up his pen. Some of the people he protected later said they never understood how he kept his composure, how he could laugh at a German officer's joke in the afternoon, and then forge documents that could get them both executed by evening. They called it extraordinary courage. Hosenfeld called it something else in his diary. He called it obligation. "We have lost the war with this appalling mass murder of the Jews," he wrote. "We deserve no mercy. We are all guilty." If they were all guilty, then perhaps one man could spend what remained of his time trying to be less so. While Hosenfeld was running his underground rescue operation with one hand, with the other hand he was doing something equally insane. He was documenting everything. Every atrocity he witnessed, every massacre, every roundup, every time he watched men in German uniforms do things that no human being should ever do to another. He wrote it all down, in extraordinary, unflinching detail, in private diaries that he kept hidden in his quarters. Sometimes the language was pure rage, sometimes it was prophecy, and sometimes the schoolteacher from Hessen reached for the only framework that still made sense to him. September 1st, 1942. God allows all this to happen, to show mankind that without him, we are only animals in conflict who believe we have to destroy each other. We will not listen to the divine commandment, love one another, and must die, guilty and innocent alike. A Catholic officer in a Wehrmacht uniform, writing theology in secret while the ghetto burned outside his window. Now, stop and think about what that means for a moment. A German Wehrmacht officer in occupied Warsaw, keeping a written record of Nazi war crimes. If those diaries were ever found, that is not a demotion. That is not a court-martial. That is a bullet, or worse, a slow death in a Gestapo cellar. So how do you hide something that dangerous? Wilm Hosenfeld did the only thing more audacious than writing the diaries in the first place. He mailed them home. He wrapped the diaries in brown paper, addressed them to his wife Anne-Marie in Thallau, Germany, and he dropped them into the official German military postal system, the same system that carried orders from the High Command, that moved classified documents across the Reich, that was monitored by military censors whose entire job was to catch exactly this kind of thing. He hid his treasonous journals in plain sight of the people who were looking for treasonous journals. Think about what had to go right for that to work. The package had to look ordinary. It had to feel ordinary. The address had to be familiar. A wife writing to her husband, or in this case, a husband sending something home. The weight had to be consistent. The paper couldn't bulge in the wrong way. And the censor, the man or woman who might randomly pull that package off the pile, cut it open and read every word, had to not choose that package on that day. That is the knife's edge Hosenfeld lived on. And somehow, the diaries made it through. Every time. His wife received them, kept them hidden in their home in Germany. And those diaries would eventually become one of the most important first-person testimonies of Nazi atrocities ever written by a German soldier. November 1944. The Warsaw Uprising had been crushed. The city was rubble. The Germans were preparing to raze whatever was left, building by building, block by block. And somewhere in that ruin, in a gutted apartment building surrounded by Wehrmacht soldiers, a 33-year-old Jewish man was slowly starving to death. His name was Władysław Szpilman. Before the war, he had been the most famous pianist in Poland. He had survived the ghetto. He had survived deportations. He had survived the uprising. He had survived things that no human being should be required to survive. Now he was hiding in the attic of a bombed-out building, wrapped in an old coat, living on whatever he could scavenge from abandoned rooms. And one day, a German officer found him. The officer demanded to know who he was. Szpilman told him the truth. He was a pianist. He had been hiding here. He was Jewish. And then the officer, this German Wehrmacht captain in full military uniform, asked him to play something. There was a piano in the room, covered in dust and debris. Szpilman sat down and played Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece of music that begins with a question and ends in catastrophe. When it was over, the officer was silent for a long moment. Then he helped Spillman hide. He brought him food, a coat. He came back multiple times over the following weeks, risking his own life each time to make sure the man was still alive. That officer was Wilm Hosenfeld. He never asked for gratitude. He never asked for anything. He simply said before he left for the last time, "If you survive, tell people a German helped you." In January 1945, the Red Army arrived in Warsaw. For most of the people Hosenfeld had hidden, protected, and forged documents for, this was liberation. The sound of Soviet tanks rolling through the rubble was the sound of survival. For Wilm Hosenfeld, it was the sound of a trap closing. He was captured near Radom wearing a German Wehrmacht captain's uniform. That uniform, the same uniform he had used as a shield to walk among monsters, to access the files, to stamp the documents, to protect the people the uniform was supposed to be hunting. That uniform was now his crime. He didn't run. He didn't destroy his papers. He expected naively, reasonably, humanly, that the truth would be enough. He was a Wehrmacht officer, yes, but he had saved people. He had documented atrocities. He had worked against the regime from inside it. Surely someone would listen. The Soviets were not listening. He was processed, interrogated, accused of being a war criminal. He told them everything. He told them about the documents he'd forged, the people he'd put on the German payroll, the diaries, Spillman, the 50 lives. The interrogators wrote it down and called it a fabrication, enemy propaganda, a Nazi officer inventing a story to save his own skin. Here is the thing about justice systems built on ideology rather than evidence. They don't need to prove you're guilty. They just need to decide that you are. And Wilm Hosenfeld wore a German uniform. In Soviet eyes, that was the verdict. He was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. He was 50 years old. But here's the part of this story that will break your heart completely. The people Hosenfeld had saved, they knew. Word traveled among the Polish survivors, Spillman, the resistance fighters, the men and women whose names appeared on forged Wehrmacht payroll sheets. They found out what had happened to the German officer, their German officer, and they did the only thing they could think to do. They wrote letters to Soviet authorities, to the Red Cross, to anyone who might listen. Letter after letter, signed by men and women who had every reason in the world to hate every German soldier who had ever existed, testifying that this one man was different, that this one man had risked his life for them, that he deserved to be free. The Soviets intercepted the letters. They read them, and they classified them as fascist propaganda. Wilm Hosenfeld died in Soviet captivity on August 13, 1952, a brain hemorrhage, officially. His body was buried in a mass grave in Stalingrad. His family was not notified for years. His wife, Anne-Marie, the woman who had kept his treasonous diaries hidden in their home through the entire war, waited for years for a husband who was already dead before she knew he was dying. He never came home. He had spent the war surrounded by soldiers of the worst regime in human history, working against them from the inside, and he had survived. He had made it to liberation. He had lived long enough to see the fall of the thing he despised. And then the wrong people put him in a cage and left him there until he was gone. Spillman survived the war. He became, once again, the most celebrated pianist in Poland. He performed for kings and heads of state. He lived until 2000. He never forgot the German officer in the ruins. When he finally published his memoir, The Pianist, he included everything, including the man who had saved him. Roman Polanski turned it into a film. Adrian Brody won an Academy Award. The world watched the scene of a starving Jewish man playing Chopin in the ruins of Warsaw for a German soldier in the doorway. And somewhere in the story, if you were paying attention, there was a name. Wilm Hosenfeld. In 2009, Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Israel, posthumously recognized Wilm Hosenfeld as righteous among the nations, one of the highest honors the state of Israel can bestow. He never knew. There is a particular kind of injustice that history reserves for its most inconvenient figures, the ones who don't fit cleanly into any side of any story. The Germans couldn't celebrate him. He had betrayed them. The Soviets couldn't free him. He wore the wrong uniform. The war was over, and the bureaucracy of vengeance was not interested in nuance. So this man, this Catholic schoolteacher from Hessen, who looked at the worst thing his civilization had ever produced and said, "I will not be part of this." This man who forged papers under the noses of the Gestapo, who mailed his treasonous diaries through the Reich's own postal system, who brought bread to a Jewish pianist in a ruined attic, who put resistance fighters on Hitler's payroll, died on a concrete floor in Bobruisk. Prisoner 174, unrepentant fascist, enemy of the Soviet people. His file said he was guilty. History says otherwise. Remember him.